That morning, Seattle was still wrapped in a thin mist, soft as breath. I arrived at Resonance Studios early, as always, around 6:30 in the morning, when the sun hadn't yet broken past the glass towers along the pier. For 18 years, I had been the first to unlock the doors, switch on the stage lights, check the power boards, and refill the air pumps in the recording booths. No one ever told me to do it. But if I didn't, no one would. Resonance ran smoothly because I liked everything to be steady before anyone realized something might go wrong. That morning felt like any other until I opened my inbox. The subject line hit me right between the eyes: alignment and future opportunities. Quick sync. My brow tightened. A surprise Monday meeting from HR rarely brought good news. Still, I kept going, organizing maintenance tools, wiping the camera screens, brewing coffee for the creative team. Back then, I still believed I was just being overly cautious. At 4:58 in the afternoon, as people began to head home, I stepped into conference room B. Jason Clark, the young CEO with the perfect suit and intern smile, was waiting across from me. Beside him sat Lydia, the HR director. Her eyes carried a strange mix of sympathy and satisfaction. No one said hello. Only the hum of the air conditioner and the cold light from the fluorescent tubes filled the room. Lydia started first, her voice polished and practiced like a commercial script. "Claire, thank you for coming. We just wanted to have a quick chat about some organizational changes for next quarter." I stayed quiet. I had sat through enough of these meetings to know the rhythm, the words, the tone shifts, the gentle phrasing meant to soften the blow. Jason nodded, avoiding eye contact. He said, short and clean, "This is part of a restructuring plan to optimize operating costs before our IPO phase. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." That phrase always comes right before someone takes away what's yours. I looked at him, keeping my voice calm. "I understand. When does it take effect?" Lydia slid a folder toward me. "Immediately. Severance details will be sent via email. We'll need your key card and keys." I unclipped my badge and reached into my pocket for the old keychain. 11 keys, each hand-labeled by me back in 2005. When I set them on the table, the metal clinked softly, like a door locking shut on a long chapter of my life. Jason looked at the keys and murmured, almost to himself, "No one is irreplaceable. I hope you understand that." I gave him a thin smile. "I understand more than you think." I stood, thanked them for being direct, and walked out before Lydia could finish her final line from the script. Outside, a sharp wind swept through the glass corridor. I walked slowly past the glowing Resonance Studios sign. 18 years. I had seen this place grow from a basement booth into a full production complex with 5 sound stages and hundreds of employees. Knew the hiss of every air vent, the burnt plastic smell when equipment overheated, even who secretly slept in the editing rooms on weekends. And now all I had left was a termination letter and a silence that stretched too long. At the parking lot, I glanced up through the second-floor windows. Jason was still inside, talking on the phone, probably to the CFO. I didn't feel anger, just emptiness. I started the engine and merged into the gray Seattle traffic. In the rearview mirror, Resonance's lights blurred and faded like a stage after the show ends. 18 years of loyalty, gone in 10 minutes. I drove home without the radio on. One sentence kept looping in my head: no one is irreplaceable. Somewhere deep down, I knew he was wrong. He just hadn't realized it yet. At a red light, raindrops began tapping against the windshield. My hands were cold on the wheel until I turned on the heater. I thought of you, whoever's listening, sitting in a warm room somewhere, maybe sipping your evening coffee while hearing my story. Have you ever been pushed aside after giving your youth to keep something standing? If you have, then you understand the silence that follows those words. No one is irreplaceable. The light turned green. I pressed the gas and drove on. In Seattle, rain is nothing new. But that day it fell slower, heavier, as if it wanted to drown the city in my quiet. I exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. This story is only beginning, and maybe only those who've been underestimated will truly understand what comes next. If you've stayed with me till this point, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city or a time you were pushed aside in the comments below. And if you love stories of quiet revenge, of justice served with intellect rather than anger, don't forget to subscribe. I promise, the next chapter will make you smile in the most satisfying way. When I got home, it was a little past 7 in the evening. My small fifth floor apartment looked the same as always, tidy, quiet, so still I could hear the rain tapping against the metal railing outside the balcony. I hung my coat, set my bag on the table, and stood still for a few seconds, looking around. Something felt unfamiliar in the familiar space. Maybe because today, for the first time in 18 years, I no longer belonged to Resonance. I made myself a cup of ginger tea and opened my laptop to jot down a few final handover notes, but my hand froze when I saw the new email icon light up. It was from Lydia. The subject line said clearly, "Confirmation of full company property return." I let out a small laugh. Even when firing people, they still behaved like a soulless system. I closed the laptop without replying. Instead, I walked to the wooden cabinet beside my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. That was where I kept a stack of old documents no one cared about except me. Among the yellowed papers was a thin folder inside a faded plastic sleeve, labeled in my handwriting. Lease 2005, Claire Donovan only. I pulled it out and blew off the fine layer of dust. For a moment, memories rushed back. In 2005, Resonance was still a small group of 6, renting the basement of an old building in the south end of the city. We had nothing but a few used cameras and a dream of building our own studio. When the company applied to lease the current location, the bank rejected it for lack of credit. I offered to sign the lease under my name, just to help everyone keep the opportunity alive. I still remember that afternoon when Randy, the original founder, told me at a small coffee shop, "We just need one person to believe in this, Claire. Without you, we'll be working out of my garage." I signed without hesitation. I wasn't reckless, but I believed in the work and in the people who shared the same vision. After that, they never replaced my name on the lease. Every renewal came back from legal with a secondary copy still reading, "Lessee, Claire Donovan." No one noticed, and I never mentioned it. I sat down and opened the old contract page by page. The print was faint, the red seals almost gone, but my name was still there, clear as day. I turned to the last appendix, the renewal clause. The tenant must submit written notice of renewal at least 30 days before the contract's expiration date. In the upper corner, the expiration date read August 1st. I picked up my phone and checked the calendar. It was August 3rd. I sat in silence for a few seconds. They forgot. They really forgot. No email, no formal notice had been sent to the property owner, me. They were too busy chasing their IPO timeline, too caught up in strategy meetings and branding discussions to realize the foundation of their entire company rested on a piece of paper buried in my drawer. I turned on the desk lamp and flipped through more old records. Every maintenance invoice, cleaning contract, and security agreement from those early years was still in my name. Many accounts had been under my personal information because back then the company didn't yet have full legal status. I had forgotten all that, not out of carelessness, but because I never imagined the day they would turn their backs on me like this. The tea had gone cold. I picked up a pen, wrote a short note on a sticky pad, and placed it on the lease. Expired August 1st. No renewal request submitted. Current status: tenant in breach. I read the line again and again, half dazed, half amused, like someone who just discovered a weapon others had forgotten. I walked to the window. Outside, city lights shimmered over the murky water of the harbor. The wind pushed the curtain gently, and for a second I smiled. Not the kind of smile born of joy, but the quiet one that comes when you remember a detail everyone else has missed. I went back to the desk and reread the lease one more time to be sure everything was valid. I whispered to myself, "They took my keys, but forgot I'm the one holding the lock." The words echoed softly through the empty room, and I realized this wasn't just fate's little joke. Maybe it was a reminder that the things we build for others always leave traces, no matter how hard they try to forget. I closed the folder and set it on the desk beside an old photo of me and the founding team on our first day opening the studio. Everyone was smiling, me included. No one could have guessed that 18 years later, I'd be the only one left who remembered the first bricks. I turned off the lights, leaving only the desk lamp shining over the folder's cover. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. Inside me, a quiet thought began to rise. Not vengeance, not bitterness, just the need to remind them that in every system, there's always someone who still knows how it really works. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. The air still carried the chill and dampness of last night's rain, clinging to my skin like a quiet reminder. I made a cup of coffee and sat at my desk, staring at the folder labeled Lease 2005, Claire Donovan only. Every detail in my mind was sharp, like the stage lights I had turned on every morning for 18 years. But today, it wasn't caffeine keeping me awake. It was the realization that they had forgotten to renew the lease. They were illegally renting the very building they thought was theirs. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the news. On Resonance's homepage, a new article stood out. CEO Jason Clark shares strategy for IPO preparation, entering a new era of digital creativity. I clicked. In the photo, Jason stood center stage, a massive LED screen behind him, flashing the words efficiency, vision, growth. He looked confident, maybe a little arrogant. I remembered the look in his eyes when he said, "No one is irreplaceable." To him, I was probably nothing more than an operating expense, a number that needed to disappear so the balance sheet could shine cleaner. Somewhere in the city, Jason was starting his morning too, though I imagined it felt very different from mine. I could almost picture his meeting. The 10th floor boardroom, glass walls, bright lights. CFO Scott Dunnis is presenting financial charts before the board. Cost ratios, profit margins, EBITDA trends, all glowing on the screen. Scott spoke in that flat, measured tone accountants use when they're really reading a verdict. Personnel costs are up 18% year over year. The operations department generates no direct revenue. Before IPO, we need to cut at least 20%. Jason leaned back in his chair, silent. He knew it was true. Every investor he'd met had asked the same thing. How do you cut fixed costs without losing productivity? In his mind, my name appeared. Claire Donovan. The middle-aged woman who always came in first, spoke little, earned too much, and stayed too long. A stubborn expense that had existed for nearly 2 decades. He had once respected me, but now the numbers were pressing harder. He asked quietly, "If I cut positions like Claire's, how much will the next quarter's report improve?" Scott answered without emotion. Around $120,000 per quarter, enough to bring operating costs below the industry average. Jason nodded slowly. "I want clean data, no emotion." The meeting ended. He stepped into the hallway where Lydia, the HR director, was waiting. She asked, "Are you sure? Claire's the only one who understands the building's infrastructure. No one knows the electrical and camera systems like she does." Jason sighed. "No one is irreplaceable, Lydia. I need to prove that resonance isn't dependent on one person." Lydia nodded, though something uncertain flickered in her eyes. At that same moment, I was tidying up my desk at home. Every paper, invoice, and contract is stacked neatly into piles. When I saw the utilities summary from 2007, all paid through my personal account during the company's early unregistered years, it hit me. I wasn't just an employee. I had literally kept the company running. I wondered if Jason ever remembered the nights when the power went out mid-shoot or when the generator caught fire from overload. I was the one who stayed until midnight fixing it. No one ever acknowledged that, yet they kept filming their Future of Creativity videos under the same lights I had installed. That afternoon, Jason returned to his office. Lydia handed him a short report titled Layoff Progress, Phase 1 Completed. He signed at the bottom without reading closely. 18 years of my work reduced to 2 lines and a signature. He slipped the pen into his pocket and stared out the window. Down below, employees were still bustling about. He told himself he had done the right thing. Cut to grow. A small sacrifice for a larger goal. He didn't know the clean numbers he wanted so badly were already hiding a flaw no algorithm could detect. A flaw called forgetting to renew the lease. That night, while he was on the phone with an investor celebrating the IPO progress, I sat in my small apartment, carefully reopening every page of the old contract and marking clauses in red ink. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt either, just calm, in a way that felt almost deliberate. As the clock hand moved past 9, I looked out the window. The city lights shimmered on the water's surface. It struck me that Jason and I were both preparing for the future. He for his IPO, and I for the moment they would realize not everyone can be replaced. I turned off the lamp, gathered the folder, and before going to bed, I wrote a single line in my notebook. August 3rd. They forgot. I didn't know what I would do tomorrow, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't stay silent forever. On Wednesday morning, the sky cleared unexpectedly after days of rain. Light poured through the window and lit up my small apartment, but my head felt heavy. I made coffee and opened the lease folder again, the 10th time in 2 days. I knew every line by heart, but each time I read it, I found another layer of meaning. Something burned quietly inside me, somewhere between hurt and clarity, pushing me to do something that would end this in a fair way. I set my cup down, picked up my phone, and scrolled to a name I had not called in years: Eddie Miller. Eddie had been my intern back when Resonance was only a tiny studio. He was quick, eager, and always asking me about how to manage a building, from contracts to wiring. Later, he studied law and opened his own firm, specializing in commercial real estate. When his voice came through the line, I heard surprise. Claire, my God, how long has it been? 10 years? I need help, I said. It is about a lease, my old company's lease. His tone shifted, calm and professional. You still have the original, I signed it myself. A short pause. Then Eddie asked slowly, They forgot to renew, didn't they? I think so. Good. Send it to me right away. And Claire, do not tell them anything yet. 2 hours later, we met at a small cafe near Union Lake. Eddie looked over the stack of papers I brought, flipping through each page and jotting quick notes with his pen. I told him briefly about the layoff, about Jason and Lydia, about the cold email from HR. When I mentioned the expiration date was the 1st of August, Eddie stopped writing and looked straight at me. They made a mistake. If they didn't send a written notice before that date, the lease rights revert to you. They are no longer the legal tenant. You have the right to terminate the lease cleanly and completely. I sat still. Part of me felt vindicated, the other part heavier. Eddie, I don't want this to turn into revenge. You are not taking revenge, he said. You are reclaiming what is already yours. That afternoon, I didn't go straight home. I drove through downtown instead, past the Resonance building, gleaming in the afternoon light. Through the second-floor windows, I saw some of the people I used to work with, still laughing, still rushing, still believing their jobs were safe. I didn't feel anger toward them. They were just part of a system where people like me always fade into the background. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new folder named Closure. I scanned every document, every utility bill, every maintenance contract that still bore my signature. Eddie sent me a draft of the commercial lease termination notice. We edited every sentence, making sure it complied with every legal requirement. When it was done, he messaged me, Back to you to sign. I will handle the rest. I looked at the document. The first line read, Notice of termination of commercial lease effective 30 days from the date of signing. Below it was a blank space for my signature. Sat holding the pen but didn't write right away. I wasn't afraid, just thoughtful. Was this right, or was I becoming like them? Cold, practical, putting logic above loyalty? I looked at the old photo from the studio's opening in 2007. Everyone was smiling, including me. Randy, the founding partner, once said, Nobody knows this company survived because of you, Claire. Maybe he was right. And now, I would make them remember. I put the pen down and signed. The ink spread into the paper like a long breath. Folding it felt like closing one chapter and opening another whose ending I didn't yet know. The next morning, I mailed the hard copy to the building manager and uploaded a digital copy to the city portal for official filing. A short message from Eddie followed. They received it. They have 30 days. Claire, when it begins, don't fear the silence. Let silence do its work. I read the message and smiled. Sunlight from the window cast a warm glow across the folder, reflecting off the still wet signature. I took a sip of coffee and listened to the steady ticking of the clock. For the first time in years, I felt in control. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. When they asked for the keys, I would hand them the entire building. 3 days after I signed the lease termination notice, Eddie texted to say the papers had been verified. I still kept myself busy with small chores, but most of my time was spent sitting by the window, looking toward downtown. There, the residence building still glowed through the night, as if nothing had changed. I knew they hadn't realized it yet. I also knew the first wave would hit soon. By the fourth day, it did. Eddie sent me a copy of an email from the property management office. They had formally notified residents that the termination of the lease was now effective within 30 days. I could almost picture Lydia's face when she opened it, the sharp composure cracking for a few seconds, her professional tone breaking apart. But the reaction I cared about most was Jason's. What would he do when he realized he had just lost the most essential thing his company owned? The answer came faster than I expected. That evening, a post appeared on Resonance's LinkedIn page. Resonance Studios reinforces its leadership position by implementing a strategic restructuring plan to ensure long-term stability. The comments flooded with congratulations, all hollow phrases. But between the lines, I could read the fear. They were trying to project control, to make sure no one knew the company was about to lose its headquarters. Inside the building, Jason and the executive team held an emergency meeting. Lydia placed a printed copy of the notice in front of him. "We have a problem," she said. Jason read it, his brow tightening. "Who signed this, Claire Donovan?" He looked up as if he'd just heard a bad joke. "She was terminated, but she's still the leaseholder. All building records list her as the primary tenant." The room froze. Jason leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and stared at his own reflection in the glass wall. "Can we appeal?" "Maybe," said the company's attorney. "But the contract is clear. She has the right. However," he flipped through the folder in his hands, "there is one angle we can use. Under Appendix 3, if the tenant uses the lease for personal gain or transfers rights without authorization, it could be considered a breach. If we can prove she used her personal name for corporate purposes, we might ask the court to dismiss the notice." Jason was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Do it. And Lydia, draft a press statement. I don't want this leaking. We need to look stable to investors." Lydia nodded, though the worry in her eyes was impossible to hide. She knew this time wouldn't be as simple as replacing an employee. The next morning, Eddie messaged me. "They're pushing back. They're using Appendix 3. I sat quietly for a while, then laughed under my breath. I knew they would. They always think they can win with technicalities. Eddie replied, "We're fine. I reviewed everything. You never profited from the lease. You even paid for maintenance out of pocket. They have no case." "Good," I typed back. "Let them think they have a chance. That way, they'll underestimate us." That afternoon, Jason called me directly. I was watering the plants when the phone rang. His voice was dry, tense, trying hard to sound polite. "Claire, I'd like to talk. In person. Could we meet at the firm's office?" I paused, watching the water overflow the pot, then said, "I have no reason to go there, Jason. I don't work for you anymore. I think you'll want to resolve this amicably. You may not fully understand the legal consequences of what you've done." I smiled but kept it out of my voice. "I understand more than you think. And I don't need amicable. I just need lawful." I hung up before he could say another word. That afternoon, a local paper ran a short interview with Jason about the upcoming IPO. He smiled broadly, repeating scripted lines about sustainable growth and compassionate corporate culture. I read it without anger, only a quiet pity. They were patching their image with words while the foundation was already cracking. That night, Eddie sent me their formal legal response. I read it line by line. They were indeed leaning on the appendix clause, claiming I had used my personal name for company's benefit. I turned on the desk lamp and opened another file, the old invoices for maintenance and insurance I had personally paid in the early years. All bore my signature, unpaid and unreimbursed. I sent the scans to Eddie with a single line: "If they want to fight with paperwork, we have a forest." Before bed, I stepped out onto the balcony. The Seattle night air was cold and dry, sweeping through my hair as if to carry away the last traces of emotion. I looked toward the residence building, its windows glowing like the lights of a ship cutting through a storm its crew hadn't yet seen. I knew the real game had just begun, and this time I wasn't just the silent observer anymore. A week later, Eddie called me, his voice steady and almost excited. "Claire, they've officially requested a hearing. Tomorrow morning at 10, Hanson and Reed Law Offices." I set my coffee cup down, and the quiet calm of my apartment disappeared. I had known this moment would come eventually, but hearing it set in stone, with a time and a place, still made my pulse quicken. Eddie continued, "They're bringing the company lawyer, Jason, and Lydia. Let me handle the legal part. You just stay composed." I smiled. "I worked with them for 18 years, Eddie. Staying composed is second nature to me." The next morning, the sky was gray. I chose a simple outfit: a white shirt, gray slacks, and a thin navy cardigan I always wore in the fall. I didn't need to look strong. I just needed to show up with dignity. When I arrived at Hanson and Reed, Eddie was already there waiting. He handed me a cup of tea. "You're doing all right, I'm fine," I said. "Just strange to be back in a meeting room that's not about a power outage." Eddie laughed softly, then opened his briefcase and began sorting the files. The conference room was bright and lined with lightwood. Jason sat at the head of the table, dressed in a black suit and dark blue tie. Lydia sat to his right, her hand resting on her laptop. Beside them was a gray-haired man, the company's attorney. When I walked in, Jason looked up and smiled politely. "Claire, thank you for coming." "Don't thank me," I said. "I'm here to make sure nothing gets misunderstood." The session began. Their lawyer spoke first, his voice low and practiced, reciting a long list of legal jargon about the use of a personal lease for corporate purposes and unauthorized commercial gain. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, Jason clasped his hands together and spoke in a smoother tone. "Claire, we respect everything you've done for this company. But you must understand, keeping the lease under your personal name for nearly 20 years has exposed us to serious legal risks. We don't want to take this to court. If you withdraw the termination notice, we're willing to discuss a fair financial settlement." Eddie tilted his head slightly toward me, signaling to stay quiet. He opened the folder and laid out several pages on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, here are the maintenance invoices, service contracts, and utility bills from 2005 to 2010. Every single payment was made through Ms. Donovan's personal account, without reimbursement. Also included are emails between Ms. Donovan and the property management, confirming no personal profit from the lease. If you claim she benefited, please show us one piece of evidence." The company lawyer hesitated. Lydia began scrolling quickly through her files, but Jason said nothing. I looked at him and spoke calmly. "Jason, you say I put the company at risk. But if I hadn't signed that lease, the company wouldn't exist today. I never asked for money or recognition. I just wanted fairness. You want your IPO, and I truly wish you well. But you can't build the future by erasing the foundation." He stared at me, torn between anger and disbelief. "You're destroying everything, Claire. Do you realize how many people could lose their jobs if we get evicted? Is that your idea of fairness?" I took a slow breath and kept my tone steady. "No, Jason. I'm not destroying anything. I'm reminding you that every action has consequences. You said no one is irreplaceable. Then prove it. Show me the company can stand without me." The room went silent. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded loud. Their lawyer cleared his throat softly, then leaned toward Jason. "Legally, she's in the right. If we appeal, our chances are slim. My advice is to renegotiate." Jason pushed his chair back and stood. "Let's take 10 minutes." He walked out of the room, Lydia following close behind. Eddie exhaled, then looked at me. "You just took the floor from him completely. They didn't expect you to have this much evidence." I nodded. "They forgot I was the one who kept everything, from contracts to invoices to the company birthday cards." 10 minutes later, Jason returned. His face was less tense, but his eyes colder. "Claire," he said slowly, "I want to settle this peacefully. If you agree to renew the lease, I'll acknowledge your contributions with a financial package and a public apology." I looked at him and saw the mix of pride and desperation in his voice. "Jason," I said, "you don't owe me an apology. You just need to read the contract. Expired means expired. That building no longer belongs to Resonance." He said nothing. 1 second, two, then he turned and left. The meeting ended in silence. Eddie gathered the papers, his voice firm. "That's it. They won't push this any further." On the drive home, rain began to fall again. I sat in the car, watching the drops streak down the windshield. I didn't feel joy, only relief. Maybe because for the first time in 18 years, I had been heard, seen for what I actually contributed, even if just for that brief moment. When I got home, I checked my phone. An email from Eddie waited. "The court has confirmed the legal validity of the termination notice. They have 48 hours to vacate." I sat back and read the line again, then leaned into my chair. Outside, the rain whispered softly. I murmured to myself, "Justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to arrive on time." Monday morning was clear and cold. Eddie's text arrived before my alarm. "They haven't moved out. The building management is preparing to post the eviction notice. The court approved it this morning." I read the message, set the phone down on the table, and realized my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of knowing the moment I had imagined for weeks was finally real. At 8:30, the wall clock clicked once, a tiny sound that felt final. Their time had come. 4 blocks away, the Resonance Studios building glowed as usual. I could picture it perfectly, Lydia walking in with her latte, trading small talk with the new receptionist. Jason upstairs rehearsing his pitch for the afternoon's investor meeting. None of them knew that in a few hours they would be forced to leave, not by choice, but by court order. At 9:15, the glass doors on the ground floor opened. A man in a gray suit entered, followed by 2 court officers. He introduced himself as a representative of the building management, holding a document stamped in red ink. The young receptionist could only stare as they walked straight to the elevator. 10 minutes later, a thick sheet of paper reading, "Notice to vacate premises, 48 hours," was posted neatly on the glass door of the executive office. News spread like wildfire. Second floor, third floor, then through the production wing. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering, taking photos, filming clips. Lydia stepped out of the conference room, her face pale as she saw the paper. She tried to peel it off, but it was sealed under a plastic cover. Jason appeared minutes later, suit unbuttoned, disbelief written across his face. He read the first line, then the second. Cold anger flickered in his eyes. "Call the lawyer," he ordered, voice low and sharp. Lydia fumbled for her phone. The company's attorney could only say one thing. "There's nothing to appeal, Jason. The ruling is final." He went quiet. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "She really did this." 10 minutes later, the glass doors opened again. A crew in beige uniforms entered, office relocation staff contracted by the building. They carried out the court's order to clear the premises. A white moving truck idled at the curb. Some employees packed their desks. Others sat motionless, pretending to keep working. The floor filled with the sound of packing tape, scraping chairs, and uneasy murmurs. I wasn't inside. I sat in my car across the street, watching everything through the windshield. It unfolded exactly as Eddie predicted, precise, lawful, and wordless. Just silence enforced by the law. I lifted my coffee cup, took a sip, and the bitter taste grounded me. There was no satisfaction, only a strange, steady calm. Across the street, Jason stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, his expression tangled between anger and panic. He spoke loudly, gesturing, trying to hold control. A few business reporters had already arrived. Someone must have leaked a photo of the notice online. Camera flashes flickered. Lydia stood behind him, her face expressionless, her hands trembling. It was a surreal sight. The building I once cared for had turned into a silent stage for an ending. 18 years of work, countless nights fixing system failures, saving the lights with nothing but a temporary fuse. And now I was watching the same people who once gave me orders pack up their chairs and nameplates. A perfect circle is closed. By noon, Eddie called. The story's out. Local media's running it. Tech firm Resonance Studios evicted. After lease violation. People are saying your name, Claire. Are you all right? I smiled, still watching the building from a distance. I'm fine. I'm just surprised it took them this long to see it coming. Eddie laughed quietly. You know, I've handled a lot of cases, but rarely one this clean. This isn't just revenge, Claire. It's a lesson. The afternoon faded. The sun dropped low, reflecting against the glass facade of Resonance. I watched them, one by one, leaving the building with boxes, bags, some carrying framed group photos. Jason was the last to step out. He paused at the door, looking up at the second floor where the glowing Resonance Studios sign still hung, then pulled out his phone to make a call. Maybe to an investor, maybe to his wife. I couldn't hear, only saw his lips tighten and his shoulders slump. When he disappeared, the building manager signaled the guards to lock the doors and place the red seal across them. A small sign went up beside it, property under new lease, pending occupancy. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I started the engine and drove away. In the rearview mirror, the building shrank, its lights fading completely. I thought back to the beginning, when it was just an empty space, smelling of paint, and Randy and I installed the first lighting grid by hand. Now it was over, neat, lawful, and quiet. That night, I went home and turned on the radio. Jazz filled the room, soft and warm. My thoughts stayed still. I thought of Jason, of Lydia, of the younger employees who didn't yet understand what had happened. I knew they'd find a new office soon, the company would move on. And me, I'd stay here, in the calm, waiting for the final letter from the court to arrive at my door. And when it did, I would sign it. Not out of spite, but because justice had been served, quietly, precisely, and beyond reversal. 2 days after the Resonance building was sealed, Seattle went on as if nothing had happened. The news trickled out in scattered reports. A few business blogs tried to rewrite the story into something softer, phrases like Resonance temporarily relocates to prepare for its next growth phase or a minor administrative misunderstanding. But anyone reading knew the truth. It was a thin coat of paint covering a crack that ran all the way down to the foundation. That morning, I sat in my living room with sunlight slipping through the curtains. On the table lay a thick envelope stamped by the court. I opened it and read slowly, line by line. Confirmation of execution of the lease termination order 14B/2024. The tenant, Resonance Studios, has completed vacating the premises. Legal ownership and occupancy rights are hereby reinstated to the original leaseholder, Mrs. Claire Donovan. I set the paper down and leaned back. For a moment, every sound dissolved. No rain, no street noise, only the pure silence of something ending. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt empty. When you've devoted yourself to a place for so long, even when it betrays you, walking away still carries an ache that hums quietly beneath the calm. That afternoon, Eddie stopped by with a bottle of red wine. You won, he said, half joking. I'm not sure whether to call it a victory or justice. Justice, I said, but not for me. For everyone who's ever been forgotten in silence. He popped the cork and poured 2 glasses. So, what now? I don't know, I said, watching the light ripple through the wine. Maybe I'll write the story down. Not about revenge, but about the value of not staying silent forever. My phone buzzed. Jason Clark's name lit up on the screen. Eddie and I exchanged a look before I answered. His voice was hoarse, tired, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. Claire. He paused for a few seconds, as if choosing his words. I just want to talk. Not about legal things, about everything. I stayed silent, listening to the long breath on the other end. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. The IPO, the restructuring, the numbers. I thought that was how you keep a company alive. But maybe I forgot why we started in the first place. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I get it now, I said softly. Understanding it now, Jason, is enough. Not everyone gets the chance to learn a lesson that costly. He gave a faint laugh. They say I lost everything, but really, I just lost the illusion that I could control everything. Sometimes, I said, we have to lose it all to see what we actually had. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped. I hope you find peace, Claire. I wish the same for you, I replied. After I hung up, Eddie sat quietly for a moment before asking, he gets it now. Do you regret any of it? I looked out the window at the sunset washing the rooftops in red. No, I don't regret it. I just wish it hadn't taken 18 years, and a court order for someone to finally listen. That evening, I drove to the harbor where I could see the Resonance building from a distance. It stood there silently, its glass reflecting the sky as if nothing had happened. The sign had been removed, leaving behind bare steel. But to me, it was no longer a symbol of betrayal. It was proof of something simple, that every system, no matter how powerful, has a weak point waiting for those who pay attention. I sat on a wooden bench by the water and opened my phone. A new headline appeared on social media. Former Resonance CEO speaks out after headquarters dispute. I learned that loyalty cannot be measured by performance. Thousands of comments poured in, most of them sympathetic. I read them without emotion, only feeling another circle close. That night at home, I opened a drawer and took out an old key, the one I had handed over the day they fired me. It no longer opened anything, but the metal still gleamed. I hung it on the wall beside a faded photo of our 2007 team. Eddie noticed and asked, keeping it as a memento. I shook my head. No. I keep it to remind myself that every door closes eventually, but what matters is who holds the key when it does. Night fell. The city outside sank into stillness. I sat alone, listening to the slow rhythm of the clock. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was the quiet release of setting down a weight I'd carried too long. Justice doesn't arrive with shouting or slammed fists. It comes on paper, with a signature, and the silence of someone who knew how to wait. Tomorrow, a new company will move into that building, a name unknown to the walls I once painted and the wires I once ran. But I wouldn't go back. My part was finished, and now all I had left was peace, the kind I once thought was rare, but realized had only been waiting for me to stop and let it in. 2 weeks had passed since Resonance was officially evicted, and the city of Seattle seemed to have already forgotten. The news sank to the bottom of business pages, replaced by stories of new IPOs and bright young startups. As for me, I still made my morning coffee, sat by the window, and watched the lake reflect the sunlight. Life had returned to its slow rhythm, as if the storm had never happened. But inside me there was a strange feeling, not triumph, not regret. It was like standing in an empty room, light pouring in, and realizing you could finally breathe freely. One morning, Eddie stopped by with a newspaper in hand. The front page headline read, Resonance Studios acquired. CEO Jason Clark officially steps down. I read the lines slowly. Eddie said, he sold all his shares to the new investors. Looks like they're keeping the name but moving headquarters to California. I nodded. Good. Maybe that's where it belongs. This city was enough for them to begin, but not enough for them to understand the value of their roots. Eddie studied me for a moment before asking, so what's next? More rest or something new? I smiled. Maybe I'll open a small office, consulting startups on operations and compliance. Not to get even, but to teach them not to make the same mistakes. He laughed. Justice. The Claire Donovan way. I shook my head. I don't call it justice. I call it memory repurposed. That afternoon, I drove to the old building one last time. The sky was clear, a clean blue. The Resonance sign was gone, replaced by a new one. Bloom Pulse Wellness. Your energy starts here. Through the glass, I saw potted plants, soft lights, and walls covered in leafy patterns. Across the street, a few young employees walked in carrying toolboxes, chatting and laughing. A new beginning, a different rhythm. The building that once embodied ambition had become a space for something gentler. Life, it seemed, always found a way to rearrange itself. I didn't go inside. Instead, I turned toward the small cafe across the corner. It looked the same: dark wooden door, the scent of pastries, soft jazz playing. I ordered a cappuccino and took my usual seat by the window where I could still see the building. When the waiter brought my drink, he laid a fresh newspaper beside it. On the cover, Jason Clark was shaking hands with the new investors. The caption read, "A new chapter, a costly lesson." I looked outside. The afternoon sun reflected off the glass wall, shimmering like a ribbon of light. In that moment, all the memories returned: the long nights fixing electrical faults, the laughter of the younger staff in the cafeteria, and the instant I placed my keys on the desk the day they fired me. None of it hurt anymore. They were like faded photographs, worn but beautiful, because they were once real. That evening, back home, I turned on the soft yellow lamp in my living room. The old key still hung on the wall, glinting faintly. I stood there for a while and said quietly to myself, "Everything expires, except leverage." I sat down and opened a fresh notebook, writing the first lines of the story I was about to tell. Not to complain, not to boast. I wrote it for those who've been called replaceable, to remind them that real worth isn't in titles or paychecks, but in the way they keep systems running. I wrote it for those who've been silenced, to remind them that sometimes that silence is the strongest force there is, as long as you know when to break it. When the last sentence was done, I looked out the window. The city glowed with light. I thought of Jason, of Lydia, of the people who once laughed with me in the residence hallways. Everyone was moving on with their lives. And finally, so was I. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft lamp casting its glow over the wall where the old key still hung. No applause, no fireworks, just me. And the quiet peace of knowing everything had fallen into place. Justice isn't noise. It's the silence that follows when you know every moment was worth it. I sat still for a while, letting the quiet of the room settle into me. This story had ended, but I knew out there were countless other resonances, places where loyalty was undervalued and people like me quietly kept things running while no one noticed. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've stayed silent, letting others think you were weak, when really you were just waiting for the right moment to act. If you've made it with me to this moment, I want to ask, what part of the story moved you most? Was it when Claire signed the termination notice, or when she hung the key on the wall as a symbol of freedom? Leave a comment below. I'll read every single one. And if you love stories about justice, about quiet but powerful payback, about lessons wrapped in silence, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I promise, there are more stories to come where fairness is served in ways no one expects. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes silence is the loudest voice of all.